Well, hello. Thank you again for joining me. I'm Lenore Rattray, and this is Stand Up 8, Episode 6. So Episode 5 ended with a bit of a mess, and really at this point it was all a mess. It was now Monday. It was July the 6th. I should have been heading to work. I should have been getting in my 81 baby blue Cutlass, putting in my mixtape, cranking out some Chili's or some GNR, or maybe even some AC/DC, and preparing myself for another day of boredom and monotony behind the glass counter while being forced to listen to a tinny AM radio blurting out more soft hits than really any human should ever be subjected to in their lives. I wasn't in that torturous scene. I was in this one with him. And yes, I am being cheeky. Camp Hell was true to its name. It was a hell of a lot worse than working in the retail counter of a photo studio. On top of every other sore spot on my body on this day, my eyes felt like they were coated in glue and sand. I mean, I've worn my contacts overnight before after maybe having a little too much and having to crash at a friend's place, but this was day 3 of wearing them round the clock. The scratching and the eye scraping pain was really getting harder to ignore. I said nothing though, as in addition to all that he had stripped away from me, I also did not want him to take my vision. I was getting weaker physically, and my diet of Hubba Bubba bubble gum and orange juice was doing very little to sustain me. In truth, everything was running right through, if you know what I mean. And I won't even get into what the basic human need of using the washroom in this type of situation looked like. It was just degrading and fucked up. I was never alone in those moments. I would be humiliated if anyone in my real life saw me then. I recall running through options in my mind of what I could possibly do. One thought had me dirty, frantic, and naked, stumbling down the hill onto the road, screaming for someone, anyone, to please stop their car, open the door, and help me. The possible glitches I saw in this scenario were, depending on whether my legs had any strength in them, that I probably would be hopping or limping, and I still could be bound or tied in some way, and I most likely would not make it very far down the hill before falling flat on my face. The other very real thought was that it was also possible that he would just shoot me in the back as I was trying to hobble away, and that would be that. People would freak out, I would be dead, and he would disappear into the bush, and no one would ever know the true story. The newspapers would then report that some naked, frantic, screaming chick was dead at the side of the road in North Vancouver. And when the readers would read this, they would kind of feel sorry for her, me. But in many ways, it wouldn't surprise them because this was Vancouver, after all. Land of the random, roaming insane. No one wants to get involved in that kind of stuff. I mean, no one even noticed me when I was nicely dressed and walking across the bridge 3 days ago with a much older, filthy man in broad daylight. And since, to the best of my knowledge, not one person had called the police to say they had remembered seeing me. We were invisible on our trek. So these are the stories that consumed my mind, and as such, this is the theme of this episode. Storytelling. In a world full of uncertainty and what ifs, when we are faced with adversity, what else can we look to for strength? Is the ability to tell a story a strength? I had already checked off a few boxes that included trying to be adaptable, agreeable, and compliant. I wasn't a fighter. Physically, I had failed that test, and my mental fight was weakening. I was stuck and grasping. My scratchy and burning eyes were watching him. All of my senses were on. It was day 4 of this new, surreal world of true survival, and I was doing my best to make sense of it all. It should be, well, it's going now. So yeah, okay. The first one was when I did it before, so.
All right.
Okay. I'll try not to move in my chair too much here. I feel almost one of the key survival tactics, if you may, that kept me alive was storytelling. And somehow I figured out that the more I talked, the less he was interested in hurting me. And I see, I'm passionate about storytelling now, and as a writer I always have been, but I also see that it's prevalent in so many different industries these days. It's become a buzzword. I'm interested in your perspective on the role that storytelling plays in policing, in particular investigations.
Well, police personnel by and large are great storytellers. It's part of our being. It's part of our existence, really, because we have to be able to relate to other people to be able to achieve our goals. We relate to other people by, verbally, by portraying not necessarily, what we are in reality, but what we want them to believe that we are. We want to come as a person in control, a person in power, and you do that by creating and providing a story, right? Well, and then once that comes to its fruition, you have to take that event and all those events and take it before sometimes a judge and jury, most times the media, and you have to know what part of the story to tell the media, and then obviously what has to be brought out in the courtroom before the jury and the judge. So it's, again, it's storytelling. And if you go in and if you're not looked at as someone who should be listened to, then that has an effect, a negative effect on your credibility. Credibility and honor are I think, honored is what we strive for in order to have credibility. And that's always been my observation, anyway. And we do that by our story. How do we tell our story that everybody listens to it and says, that's believable? If you go into any situation and you don't have a presence, and I'm not saying it has to be an overpowering, overbearing presence, but just a presence, and that you are someone that has to be listened to, and you've given enough of yourself to allow those people to feel comfortable enough to share with you what they know, right? And so then you take that information, and then within the context of storytelling, you have to tell that story to your contemporaries, to your peers, your supervisors, and you have to be believable in every aspect of that, and then further on to go into court. And you have to tell that story to a prosecutor, to a Crown Counsel, and then to a court. Obviously, the goal in all of that is to be believable and to have credibility, enough credibility that people are going to listen and say, okay, yeah, this is what we have to listen to. We need to know this person's account of this.
Statistically, is a massive increase in an interest in true crime shows. So I have sort of a two-part question for you. A, as an ex-police officer, ex-law enforcement yourself, do you enjoy and watch those types of shows? And I guess the second part would be, do you have any thoughts on the popularity that we see now?
I have watched a lot of documentary, and I use quotations around documentary shows and like provided by Netflix and some of the other streaming. And I don't want to speak to any particular show because it's just my opinion. But I think that a lot of times is that they decide what it is that has occurred, and then they do everything in their power to present the evidence, again in quotations, that support that theory. And is that a documentary? Is that a factual, representation of what occurred? I don't think so. I think it's titillating. It's kind of clickbait-ish, I suppose. I don't know what the term would be, but I don't see that there's a whole lot of veracity in that. They have facts involved in the representation or in the dissemination of the documentary. There are factual things, but lies, true lies, and damn facts, I guess. I don't know. I have watched them. I don't go out of my way to watch them because I just don't. I think there's too much bias involved in it.
Yeah. No, I could relate to that for sure. And because I'm just doing this podcast, it's sort of coming out in the storytelling process that I'm going through and with my connections. But some of the feedback that I've got is that this is really, there isn't a lot of survivor-based, survivor-voiced true crime. Like even my daughter looked at the title. Stand Up 8 made it to number 18 in Canada for true crime podcasts in the week that it was released. And that's of all true crime podcasts, American-based by big companies and everything. It got some traction, right? And the feedback that, my daughter said was, she said, Mom, it's the only positive sounding one that's out there.
Yeah, it's how salacious can we make it? I've never understood, let me digress a bit. I've never understood the phrase, well, you have to tell your truth. I've never been able to put that in its place and say, what does that mean? Mm. The truth is the truth. We all see different aspects of it, I guess. And you can see an event and form an opinion as to what happened, and I look at the same event and I have a different bias and say, well, no, that's something else again. I don't know. I just, like I say, I've never understood what that phrase means. You tell your truth. When people want to see the blood and guts of stuff. That's been my experience anyway. And it's alarming. Anybody who has any empathy for other human beings doesn't want to see other people hurt. You watch somebody cutting tomatoes with a sharp knife, and they cut their finger, and you watch that happen, and it's horrible, right? They're not going to die from it or anything, but it's still horrible, and you feel that pain if you have empathy for other people. And by gosh, I think we all have to have some empathy, or what are we?
In one way or another, we all tell stories. And in our own ways, really, all of our stories have power. We all have our own truths, which can add a bit of a complicated layer to it all, I suppose, because what we remember may not be exactly what another remembers. Perspective. From the news media, to police reports, to memoirs, all of the stories that we read and hear are based on the storyteller's perspective, their perceived truth. Detective Stu even said to me once, the worst piece of evidence that police have is usually an eyewitness report. So how does the media do it? How do they tell the truth? And is it the truth that they tell? In journalism school, we as a student body were often involved in many discussions on the importance of always reporting the truth with an ethical voice, especially when it related to children, crime victims, and sensitive topics such as suicide and mental health. It was drilled into our heads that all facts must be triple-checked and all stories must be presented in an unbiased voice. I mean, I got an F on an assignment for spelling someone's name wrong, and I believe it might even have been like a random typo. So, this is what I came to the world of media armed with, this kind of training. Get the facts right, tell the story with just the facts. Let the reader decide what the truth is. And my truth at that time of my life was that I was someone that had already come through some life garbage. The bullying had left a good-sized trauma scar, and, ironically, it took a random conversation with a cousin who I barely knew that was visiting from Vancouver to make me realize that I could do something to change that. Something unthinkable for me, at that age anyway, switch schools and start again. And incidentally, this was my cousin Debbie. She was 6 years older than me, and later on, she's an important part of this story. So because of switching schools, I met a friend, one who saw me in a whole new light and just wanted to know me for me. This was Dawn. I latched on to her, and she latched on to me. She accepted me for me. When I was 13, 14 years old, my life was pretty free, which wasn't necessarily a good thing because nobody really ever knew where I was. I was living with my dad, who was pretty much never home, maybe to sleep, but he was a single dad in his early 30s, busy working and hanging out with his friends. I was typically always home alone. Dawn's life was very different. Her parents were older, their family lives were more stable, they had routines, they were always around. So, Dawn and I hung out at my house a lot for our freedom and to eat crap food and just talk. I also liked to read the newspaper to Dawn. I didn't get the newspaper when I lived in the country. And for some reason, the crime stories about the murders and the criminals and the bad things, they fascinated me. I also didn't grow up with the TV in my home, so who knows? I read bad story after bad story out loud to Dawn, and she just listened. It was only many years later, as adults, that she actually shared with me how much she didn't like hearing these stories or didn't want to. But she did. She listened. She humored me for my hunger, I suppose, for all things dark and doomy. She was pretty indifferent to it all. So I often wonder, what was it that sucked me into those stories? Was it the birth of my journalism interests? Or maybe a deeper reason? Did reading them make me feel better? Did reading about the worst things that happened to other people make my experiences seem okay? Because storytelling and story sharing, in my opinion, bring people together. And in theory, that kind of makes them healing, right? I mean, when we all read the same newspaper story, does it help us to be all collectively informed? And further, if you think about it, it kind of goes back to the once upon a time scene where as kids we were cuddled up and hearing a story to ultimately calm us and help us rest. So do we ever stop needing stories? So many questions. I know. I promise this is going somewhere, but I have one more. Is it at all possible that storytelling could create a big enough impact that it could save someone's life? Well, I think so. Camp Hell was clearly not a summer camp, and I was not telling ghost stories around a campfire. I was just trying to keep the darkness at bay, trying to live. So let's go back to story time. Day 4, and I'm already seeing a routine developing. Wake up, torture, hog tie, shopping. Today, though, I think for the first time, he left me alone without a blindfold. Today, I was able to stare at the ground under my nose and wait for random sow bugs to cross my field of vision. And if you're not familiar with sow bugs, well, they look like little armadillos. They're kind of cute, harmless, and pretty abundant in the woods of BC. Although when we first arrived in those woods about 72 hours before that, they seemed to be crawling all over me. It was creepy, it was torturous, but now I didn't care. Both them and the ants can wildly roam. I barely felt them anymore. I had progressed, I had adapted, and I'm pretty sure that I was still gagged though. As before, at around the counted 15-minute mark, I hear the crunching of someone approaching. I stiffen, I listen, I look straight down. I don't dare to look eager or scared or needy. I feel that he needs to see that I'm just here, waiting. Again today, he is upbeat. He again has newspapers. But he says also he has something else for me. After he unties me, he allows me to sit and loosely covers me. He hands me a package of hair baubles. Not elastics, but hair elastics with baubles on the ends. I remember wearing these when I was 5, maybe 6 years old. I've never seen an adult wear them. In my mind, what I recall is the elastics were bright pink and the balls were bright blue. He's sneering at me. He looks pleased. I say nothing. The torture starts soon after. He tears open the package and tells me that he wants me to use them to tie my hair out of my face. He needs to watch my expression, I guess, when he hurts me. I don't react. I do what I'm told. After a while, he switches, and again, we sit and read the papers. We're side by side for almost an hour, turning pages and saying nothing. He probably ate something, I guess, maybe refilled my orange juice. And I think maybe he was the first one to find the article, if you can call it that. Buried in the back pages of the Vancouver Sun, there was an article that was maybe 2 short paragraphs that simply stated that I was missing, along with my vital identifying details. My name was there, of course, along with my age, identifiable features, basic things like my hair and eye color. Also included was a black and white photo that my college boyfriend had randomly taken of me on a hiking trip. I wasn't posed, I wasn't smiling, and I was looking out away from the camera. He read the text of the story to me word for word in an upbeat, excited tone. But there were 2 things that caught me off guard. The first being the reference to a large scar on my left leg, and the second, the fact that I had blue eyes and brown hair. I asked him to read it again. My hair's not brown, I said. And I asked him, does my hair look brown to you? No, he replied, and kind of snickered. Your hair is definitely blonde. Do you dye it or something? I've never dyed my hair, I said. Anyone who knows me knows that. This misprint was weirdly bugging me. I went off on a bit of a tangent. I've made it a point to never dye my hair, I repeated. I like my hair exactly as it is. If I dye it, the blonde will go darker, and I will have to keep doing it. It's how it works. He seemed to find this amusing. And how's anyone going to recognize you with a picture like this, he added. This doesn't even look like you. My heart sank. He was right. Was this really the only picture my family could find of me? And who the hell said I had brown hair? My faith in being found, my family, policing, and journalism in general was plummeting. I went on, this is terrible journalism. If I even misspell the person's name in journalism class, I got D's and F's on my papers, I said. I'm a missing person. And who looks at people's legs for scars? I added. It was all just confusing me. He was more relaxed, if I could call it that, and kind of kept flipping through the paper. I really did pick the wrong person, he repeated. Kind of a rhetorical question, something, as I mentioned, he had already said the other night. But he agreed with me. The detail about the scar on the leg added no value to someone in my type of situation. The scar was sizable, but the hair color and the eye color were more likely the features that people would look for. He was in more of a talkative type mood than I had seen before. He seemed to want to know more. He asked me again how I got the scars. I told him that when I was 7 years old, a drunk driver doing 90 kilometers an hour hit me with his car, and as a result, I sustained life-threatening injuries and had to relearn most everything, walking, talking, eating. I told him that I was essentially split right up the middle, and as a result, I had irreparable nerve damage, which impacted my ability to feel any pleasure down there. I intermixed fictional details with some true details to create a pretty sad story of a poor young girl damaged before she ever had a chance to truly embrace all that a man could give her. I guess I felt that's what he wanted to hear. It was a fucked up version of some sort of perverse, twisted, simple man's, Harlequin romance. But he was buying what I was selling, and I had the scars to prove it. The physical evidence of something messed up happening to my body was there, and I was going for it. Story time it was. I think this was when he started telling me about his amazing sex life with his wife, Allison. I wanted to vomit. This thing had a wife? Could she see clearly? Could she smell? He again began to prattle, and I let him. If his black, beady pits for eyes could glint some sort of semblance of sparkly presence, I guess I was seeing it. He went inside his head to Allison land. They had been married for 10 years, and apparently their sex was amazing. According to him, he was amazing in bed. Performance-wise, according to him, he was larger than most men, and she could not get enough of him. It took all of my might to focus and listen and feign interest, but the sharing time was new, and it was expanding the time between torture times. So I thought, keep telling me horse shit about your love life. I had to see that this was also progress. As messed up as it was, though, in my head, I was thinking, this is fucking crazy. You're none of these things. You're a stinking pile of garbage, and you can't tell me that what you look, smell, and act like now happened overnight or ever since you escaped from prison. No sane woman would ever willingly get naked with you, let alone marry you. And your size and ability to perform right. Have you forgotten that I've been with you for 3 days? I know how you perform. We were on a new page, and I started to see how out of touch his reality was. He was very detailed and maybe believable in his story, but it was almost like a regurgitation of every maybe porn movie that he'd ever seen. That was my impression anyway. He puffed his chest. He seemed to like having an audience, and I listened. At least a couple of hours went by, and stories about Allison soon turned into stories about where he came from and where I came from. Family stuff, the basics. We went on a bit. Back and forth, I made sure I gave him time to speak, but I also made an attempt to interject details that would make him feel sorry for me. To add to his, "I picked the wrong person, didn't I?" statement, I guess. "Another reason I have to go home," I said, "is because of my eyes. I don't want to wreck my eyes out here. I've had my contacts in for 3 days and it's starting to burn. It hurts." He listened and looked closely at my eyes, pointing out that my blue eye makeup had rubbed off on one eye. I never wore blue eyeshadow. He was talking about the side of my face that was swollen. And then it started to rain. It was late in the afternoon, possibly early evening, and the rain brought him back to the here and now. He looked at his watch. He told me to go on my belly. It was serious time again. Here we go. Hogtie, shopping, torture, dinner. Was it just my imagination, or did it hurt more today? Was the brutality a bit more brutal? It was getting dark, and we were now covered by his makeshift clear plastic tenting. He was quietly munching on something, maybe. I think it might have been pizza. I wasn't hungry. He again pulled out the map of Mosquito Creek, the park that we were in. He showed me the trail of how he was going to let me go. "Not tonight, though," he added. "I'm sorry, you're going to think I'm a prick again, but it's too slippery to do it in the rain." I started to protest, but it was quickly shut down, and he, in the next second, gave me what I'm guessing was supposed to be a peace offering. He pulled out a box of contact lens solution. A brand new, unopened bottle popped out of his Safeway bag, and he watched me for a reaction. "Oh," I said, followed by a weak "thank you." Apparently his captive prize and her eyes would live to see another day.